as I left work this afternoon, a phrase, I suppose, or a descriptor came into my head for no particular reason. I wasn't thinking about anything specific, but that phrase is now the title of this little video. And after having this pop into my head, I started, sort of reverse engineering what would I associate this with, or what could possibly have triggered this in the back of my mind to, manifest itself. And the first thing that came to mind, being me, was a portion of the dynamic that can take place between a dom and a sub, or a top and a bottom, depending on the situation. Now, if I recall, I have waxed a little philosophical on this in a previous video, or videos. It's been quite a while since I've made a video. But I thought I would, for the sake of the occurrence of this phrase popping into my head, make a video just about it. So, what do I mean when I say a safe and satisfying terror? There is a portion of interaction between a dominant and a submissive that combines, and I should clarify, this does not apply to everyone. Everyone's power exchange dynamic can be different, but this is a common element, and you can fill in the gaps, so to speak, with whatever scenario, circumstance, or activity this applies to. But in many power exchange relationships, there is an element of mystery combined with fear. And this is a enticing, exciting, and also welcome aspect to a relationship. Now, people on the outside of this might think, how can terror or fear be a good thing in a relationship? So here's how I've figured out how to explain it to someone who might not know. And obviously, given the video that I'm making here and the channel and the subject matter, I may be preaching to the choir. It's entirely possible that everyone I'm talking to already knows this in some way, shape, or form. But it's also possible that someone who doesn't have any idea about the lifestyle or is trying to understand aspects of it might be listening. So if this is repetitive for you or unnecessary, hey, there you go. But otherwise, here we go. The best way I can describe it is the trust game. Have you ever taken part in the age-old team-building exercise trust game of turning your back to someone and falling backwards with the idea that they will catch you? Okay. Now, most of the time, whether the person is either a complete stranger, as a coworker, or someone that you know well, there is a sense of security in a common and shared humanity that the other person will not let you fall intentionally. And yet, regardless of who it is, how well you know them, or your relationship with them, there's a couple of factors operating there. There's one, the lizard brain sort of fear of falling backwards without an assured landing spot that you can see. And there's also that little possibility that either A, they're going to punk you and step aside just as you're falling down, or B, they will attempt to catch you but fail in some way and fumble, and you'll still fall on your ass. That little twinge of doubt and fear, but also encompassed in a relative sense of safety, is sort of what I'm talking about. Except that in this case, in the case of a dom and a sub, that mystery and that fear is encased in a trust that one can go a little bit beyond the bounds of what might otherwise be acceptable because there's the trust and the established relationship that at the end of the day, everything will be okay. Now, this kind of trust, obviously over one's physical or mental health, takes a while to establish, at least in most cases. Some people, they have a connection immediately off the bat and everything's fine. But generally speaking, if you're going to be a submissive to a dom or a bottom to a top, whether for a long relationship or a scene, there has to be some trust established. Now, in something that's relatively transitory, like doing a scene with a relative stranger or just meeting up with somebody for a one-night stand kind of thing, that trust might be established with a specific contract, written down boundaries of activity and things like that. And so long as you have some idea that this person will adhere to those rules, you can feel safe that they may push the envelope, but they're not going to go too far. At the same time, however, there's the possibility they might do something a little bit more extreme, or start pushing a boundary that you gave them, but want to see if they'll actually go past just a little bit, because while it's something that maybe you fear, it is something you want to try. That's something I've mentioned before in negotiations between a dom and a sub. One of the better questions to ask your submissive or your dom is, what's something that scares you but that you're turned on by? Because that can be something to experiment with, and that is also an area of terror, but also titillation, depending. So, for example, let's take an extreme case just for the sake of being very cut and dry. Let's say, for example, that your submissive has a fantasy about being forcefully made to have sex, or effectively a rape fantasy. These became sort of mainstream popularized with 50 Shades of Grey. And I'm talking about the fantasy of rape, not the actuality of rape. That distinction needs to be made, I suppose, more so now than ever, all things considered. But let's say that your partner has a rape fantasy, and they've expressed this to you. It's something that scares them because obviously the act of sort of submitting yourself, or I should say, being made to submit to something like that, to the sense of violence and violation, is taboo, is in real life not a pleasant thing. But, the idea of being taken that way excites them. But it is fearful for them. Now, if you've agreed upon this notion that a rape fantasy is a fearful desire, that actually might be a better title for this. Maybe I'll make that the subtitle. But you know that your partner is allowed to attempt it. But even if it does happen, you know that it's not actually happening for real. You know what I mean? Like the trust game again. Let's say that falling backwards is the rape fantasy. And that little moment between being on balance on your feet and falling backwards into space is whatever could happen in that rape fantasy. The extent of the actions taken by your partner, or the fear or thrill or anything else that might come about from fulfilling that fantasy. But or at least you're pretty sure, that by the end of it, or in the course of it, nothing really bad is going to happen because they'll be there to catch you when you fall. Now, the trust is they will be there to catch you when you fall. The thrill, the excitement of it is the small measure of doubt of the unknown of exactly what are they going to do to me, how far are they going to go before I use my safe word, or before we take a pause, or will they go right up to the edge and stop and establish that trust even further for the next time. That is sort of what a safe and satisfying terror is. It's like a roller coaster. You're on the rails, there's only one direction this thing can go, but there's always that possibility that it might come off the track. It's always that possibility that the G-forces are going to do something this time that hasn't happened with everybody else that came on the ride before you. And that's where the fun is. Being scared, going to a horror movie and knowing that you're going to walk out into the sunlight, presumably, or into the dark with your date, and who knows what they're going to do after that. Calling back to Michael Jackson's Thriller, which if you haven't seen, you're probably far younger than I am, but you should see it. Anyway. There's not much more for me to say without going into specifics. I mean, I use the rape fantasy as an example because it's the most sort of extreme and sort of well-known one at this stage of the game, thanks to 50 Shades. But if you're someone who is just starting out in the lifestyle, or if you're someone that's trying to understand what the allure is, just imagine the thrill and excitement of going on a roller coaster. Instead of just giving you sort of a burst of adrenaline, it also gives you a burst of hormones, the good kind of hormones that you want to keep doing again and again knowing that you're on rails, but always not 100% sure everything's not going to go completely topsy-turvy. Anyway, there's my soliloquy, for lack of a better word. And as always, thank you for listening.